Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my video game review series. So today we're going to be looking at another Lord of the Rings video game, Lord of the Rings Conquest, released in 2009, developed by Pandemic. Now this was actually the final Lord of the Rings game to be published by EA, so did EA's Lord of the Rings run go out with a bang, or was this game a disappointment? Let's talk about it. So the best way I could describe Lord of the Rings Conquest is to say that this game is basically Star Wars Battlefront with a Lord of the Rings paint job. If you've ever played Star Wars Battlefront, then you pretty much know the formula that this game has. However, calling the game a Battlefront clone, I feel like that's a bit of a cop-out. I feel as if I need to elaborate on the comparison a little bit further. The game is actually a watered-down version of Battlefront because it has the exact same formula, presentation and gameplay style as Battlefront. However, this game lacks the extensive features and single-player experience that made Battlefront so great. See, the first two Battlefront games came out in a previous generation of gaming where not as many people were infatuated with online multiplayer content. So those games, while having a solid multiplayer experience, they also had plenty of content for single-player gamers, and you could tell that the game was made with those players in mind, which is part of the reason why those games have aged so well, like fine wine. Lord of the Rings Conquest, on the other hand, has aged terribly. It's aged like milk. Because you can tell right off the bat that when Lord of the Rings Conquest was made, it was made specifically with multiplayer gameplay in mind. Because this game's single-player experience when compared to the Battlefront games is severely lacking in my opinion. And when you consider that just 1 year after this game's release, EA lost the Lord of the Rings license and the online servers for the game were shut down, yeah, that's an epic failure. Also, the game had quite a bit of DLC content that was only released for a short time before taking down after they lost the license. This is of course a harsh lesson for any game developer, and it shows them that they should really not rely entirely on multiplayer for a game's longevity. For example, in Battlefront you had numerous modes and numerous maps as well as a ton of customization options and plenty of replay value, with a truly great single player campaign with fantastic level design. Conquest on the other hand has two campaigns, the good campaign and the evil campaign, not unlike Battle for Middle-earth 2, and you also have instant action. The good campaign basically follows the events of the movies but pretty much skips all the dialogue and story moments, instead focusing on fast-paced action. You would expect that with this type of game. You start the game off with a tutorial mission in Mordor during the War of the Last Alliance. You take control of the Free Peoples as they march upon the slopes of Mount Doom to take on Sauron and his forces. This introduces you to the game's combat and class system. You have a warrior class that is the most durable and the most reliant on melee combat. You have light and heavy attacks as well as special attacks that you can charge up to cut through waves and waves of enemies in your path. The combat in this game is pretty badass, I must admit, and the visuals are very impressive. You have an archer class which of course relies on ranged attacks as you might expect, and once again you have special attacks that you can charge up in combat such as poison arrows and exploding fire arrows. You have a mage class where you can heal yourself and your allies as well as do magical damage to enemies from range. You also have melee attacks using your staff. And you also have a scout class which is more stealth oriented, sneaking up on enemies and taking them out swiftly from behind. Just like in the second Battlefront game, in addition to the regular classes, you also have heroes that can be unlocked at certain points in the story. Heroes such as Aragorn, Gandalf, Faramir, Legolas. You also have heroes in the evil campaign such as the Mouth of Sauron, Saruman, the Witch King, the Balrog and Sauron. I must admit that some of the visuals in the game when playing as some of these villains are quite impressive, particularly playing as the Balrog. The good campaign takes you on several locations in Middle-earth such as Isengard, Osgiliath, Minas Morgul, Helm's Deep and Mordor, culminating in a final assault on Sauron and his forces. The evil campaign reuses some of these areas and is basically the exact same thing but with the villains instead, culminating on a final assault on the Shire for some reason where you get to slaughter all the poor hobbits. If I'm being perfectly honest, I was not at all impressed by the single player campaigns, and it's a real shame because Pandemic did a great job with the campaigns in Star Wars Battlefront as well as Star Wars Battlefront 2, which came out before this, and were much better in my personal opinion. So now we've covered the disappointing story campaigns, now let's talk about the other feature, instant action. Again, this is basically the same as what you get in Battlefront, except with less maps and less options. You have your standard Assault, Conquest, and Capture the Flag, which is the most innovative thing they came up with in the game, which is basically Capture the Ring. That was quite fun, to be fair. These modes can be fun for a while, but unfortunately in my opinion they are extremely old school, in the sense that we've seen them done before, but we've basically seen them done much better. And yeah, that's pretty much it. As I said before, most of the content for this game consisted of its online multiplayer component, and the game has very few single player features to speak of, making the game, in my personal opinion, a massive disappointment. Despite the game's graphics and presentation being great, and the combat being fun for a while, there just isn't really much the game has to offer when compared to the other Lord of the Rings games. If you are going to play this game, then you might as well just play Battlefront 1 or 2, because this game is basically just a watered down version of those, with updated visuals for next generation consoles, and a Lord of the Rings paint job. I give Lord of the Rings Conquest a disappointing 5 out of 10. As I said before, the game has great graphics, fun combat, and a few features that I had fun with for a while, but to be honest guys, my overall perception of the game was of disappointment. Sadly, I never got a chance to play it online, and it lacks the extensive single player features and content that would have otherwise given it more longevity, like other games I already mentioned. Thanks for watching guys, stay tuned for more retrospective video game reviews. I have a lot of reviews coming to the channel in the near future, so stay tuned for those. I know that this was a short one, but to be perfectly honest, this game really doesn't have a whole lot to offer. It's a real disappointment when you compare this to, say, a game like Return of the King or The Third Age or any of the other Lord of the Rings games that came before it. This one just doesn't really hold up to scrutiny in my opinion. Thanks for watching, and God bless.